like to say happy welcome. I am a research assistant here at the Enterprise Center, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's seminar. We are joined by the lovely Professor Michelle Kelly-Louw. She's the HOD, which I'm sure most of you know her. If you don't, you will come today. Professor Michelle Kelly-Louw is the head of the Department of Commercial Law Unit here at B2 NRF. She currently holds the prestigious B2 NRF rating with a PhD in international banking law. Her extensive experience in insolvency banking and consumer credit law has been widely published and cited by top courts in South Africa and Namibia. Michelle has received multiple accolades, including the SA Department of Science and Innovation's Distinguished Young Women Scientist Award. She has played a key role in drafting significant legislation and serves on several advisory boards and legal panels for both the and interview. So please give Michelle a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Chauncey. So today I'll speak about things we all know: gender, which we are, and credit ability, credit accessibility, and credit worthiness. And we'll look at algorithms. So that's the one thing that credit providers use to assess us. And we all get nervous when we hear algorithms, but we do understand credit bureaus. So let me talk to you about that. Now, we all know that AI, artificial intelligence, there's been a renaissance. And we know algorithms are used in various industries. Insurance is a popular one. Credit is the one I'll talk to you about today. And we also know that stockbrokers and medical, especially to assess you on your medical, they use algorithms. Now, what I want to do is I want to quote with algorithms because we don't know exactly what an algorithm is. The general population doesn't know that. What it does, in short, it predicts human behavior. So it's not tailored for the individual. It's always tailored based on the information that goes in there, and it works with averages. Now, we don't know how they do it, and this is why I wanted to quote what Volpen says. And he says, how an algorithm does this, in other words, how it predicts human behavior, remains confidential and therefore unclear. Algorithms are part of a well-kept business secrets and are not revealed to any third party. Pursuant to the norms, an algorithm determining the individual conduct is never the subject, but rather the object of the operation of such algorithms. Consumers are typically unaware that the behavior is predicted and also preempted. Therefore, it has correctly been stated that human behavior is established by the operations of algorithms. And as a result, by businesses that owns that the particular algorithm and have obtained the necessary personal data and have then compiled a reliable profile of the particular consumer. So that's in short what it is. Who knows what a black box algorithm is? Has anyone heard that? But this is what our credit bureaus use, a black box. And it is really a model where you can see what's been put into the box. In other words, what information goes into this box, and we can see what comes out at the end result. In a credit bureau, it will be a credit score. Are you a good payer, slow payer, excellent payer? But what we don't know is what happens in between, with the information coming from the one side and going up to the other side. A white box is more explainable in machine learning. So there's a better understanding of what is being used and how it is accessing the information. So in South Africa, our credit bureaus are using a black box algorithm. What is the pros and what is the cons of algorithms? So why do we use it? Algorithms reduces time. So it takes less time for someone to assess your risk, whether that is medical, financial, or insurance. Now, the pro is, apparently, according to research, the black box is more accurate, but it lacks transparency and interpretability. As I said, we know this is what's going into the machine. It gives a result. We don't know how that factors and how they derive at the end result. So the black box produces output based on your input data, but do not and cannot clarify to us how they derive at their conclusion. Now, if we take the example a few years ago, 2019, Apple Card, and you can see this is a very distraught consumer. Him and his wife, same setup, same living style, married in community of property, he gets 20 times X credit limit. So he complained. They use a black box algorithm. So more or less the same information, in other words, location, married, same number of kids if they have that. And this is what happens. At the end of the day, there was an outcry on, is it now X? This was on Twitter, when it was still Twitter. And in the end, Apple gave the women the same credit. So the question is, what happened with that black box if more or less the same information goes in? So it's possible that there might be some discrimination. So how does that work in South Africa? If we look at credit, as I said, this is what I'll be focusing on. We have the National Credit Act. The Act came into operation in a staggered fashion, and it was fully in operation 2007. Now, in that Act, one of the main purposes is to prevent reckless credit. And it also penalizes credit providers that advances credit recklessly. What does that mean? Basically, in essence, if you receive reckless credit from your credit provider, you don't have to repay your credit. Obviously, there are some certain safety measures in place. In terms of our National Credit Act, it's compulsory for any credit provider, banks and other credit providers, to do affordability assessments of consumers. And it's set out in our regulations. In our legislation, the Act says two things. Credit providers need to do two things. Whether you can afford the credit, so credit affordability, can you actually repay, and credit worthiness. And for you to get credit, you need to be both. In other words, you need to be able to afford it, but you also need to be credit worthy. And credit worthiness is something completely different to what the amount of money is you have available. And this is where credit bureau reporting comes in. And that's where they say you need credit to make credit. And they look at history, and this is where algorithms comes in. Now, credit providers place different value on credit worthiness and affordability. The National Credit Act gives some guidelines with the regulations and the Act, but how they factor that in is left for the credit providers themselves. Now, we need to distinguish what is credit worthiness and what is affordability. Now, the affordability is the easy one to establish. If you can afford the credit, you can repay it. So it's an easy sum. They look at income, they look at expenses. Credit worthiness is the more tricky one. And sometimes people get confused between the two. But you need both. So if you have a big income, but you have no history of credit, you might not get your credit. And the same is true for the other way around. So before the National Credit Act, what credit providers did, they really just looked at your income. If you were a big earner, they gave you credit. They didn't really look at your income and expenses. That has all changed with the National Credit Act. Now they have to do both. So it's compulsory. So in South Africa, you need both. And credit worthiness, as I mentioned, is where the credit bureaus come in. So basically, credit worthiness is how worthy are you of credit. And how do we determine that? We look at your history. How have you been paying your credit? So we're predicting your behavior for the future by looking at your past. Now, credit providers use credit bureaus. So they use your credit scores, and that will give you the rate, that the credit limit. They will also use that to determine your interest rate. And they look at your debt repayment history. So if you're an existing consumer from a bank, it's fairly easy. They'll look at your credit reports using these algorithms through the credit bureaus. But they might also look at your own history with your bank to see whether you're paying. So if you don't have a good credit score, they might look at your record with them. For example, if you bank at Standard Bank, they will look at your record with them. And so really, in short, credit worthy is just how likely are you to repay your credit. But that's why I say the sad thing is you need credit to get credit. Now, credit reports, credit bureaus, they use these own algorithms and they use numerials to determine your credit score. How many of you in the room have looked at your credit score? I can say quite a few of you. So in terms of our National Credit Act, in terms of all our credit bureaus, you are entitled to one free report every year. So it's important to have a look at that. Sometimes they will clickbait you into finding and clicking on the option to pay for your report. showing that you'll get more information. It doesn't really matter which one you use, just as long as you use it. And you will see from that there's certain information listed on your credit score. It's good to check it regularly to make sure that there's not identity fraud or incorrect information on that. Now, the credit reports do not only show your debt repayment history, but they also use algorithms to predict your behavior in repaying that. So what it will show your credit that you have and how you've repaid, and they use numerials, numbers. They'll give a number. On our free report, I've seen you don't see all the details there, but they'll give you a number. So it'll be 1, 0, 2, and it works like that. And we'll show how long you've taken to repay. If it's your mobile phone, it will give you a score. If you pay late, it will give you a score. And that is why I say it's a black box, goes in, and it will give you a score at the end. Now, the National Credit Act regulates the information that can be kept by credit bureaus. In the past, consumers were blacklisted without you getting a notification that you will be blacklisted. That has been changed by the National Credit Act. In principle, they should contact you before they blacklist you. Whether that happens, I'm not sure. We all know we avoid numbers that we don't know the number of. But ideally, they should notify you before they list you. So really, in short, just the difference between affordability, creditworthiness, as I mentioned, you need both. Important to remember from your credit report, and as I said, they use algorithms. They keep negative and positive information. Those of you who have accessed it will see they list certain things, where you live, the identity ID number, the type of credit you have. Mobile credit will show secured credit, will show your house address, things like that. It does not say whether you can qualify for credit or gives you credit. It just gives you indication that what they think you'll be able to repay or not. Now, what is reckless credit? Because this is why it's important to get the credit bureau reports. In terms of the National Credit Act, as I said, they're not. The credit providers are prevented from reckless credit. There's two groups. The one is if your credit provider, as I said, it includes micro lenders, all credit providers, so also your fintechs. They have to do 4 steps. The first one, and this is the tricky one for South Africa, they need to show that the consumer is actually understanding the credit. And this is a very difficult one to prove. So what credit providers sometimes do in the past, they had a little form where you tick, I understand the credit. And then they absolve themselves from that responsibility. That's not good enough. But how do you prove that someone actually understands the impact of credit is a difficult question to decide. Because we all know we only look at the installment. We realize that credit is going to pay more, but when consumers sign, we're only concerned with their monthly payment. So they need to show that, and then they need to look at their prepayment history. If you're an existing consumer, they'll use that information, but this is where credit bureaus come in. They'll use that algorithm to give them an indication. Based on that, you'll get your credit limit and the interest rate. Then also they need to look at financial means, prospects, obligations. In terms of the National Credit Act, that's all income coming into the family home, all expenses of the family. So not only your expenses as a person, it's the whole family. And if it's a business, then that's another thing they need to look at and see if that is a reasonable success for this business. So if a credit provider fails any of those steps, it's reckless. And remember, if it's reckless, you might end up in this fact that the credit provider can't claim back the money. If you were dishonest, obviously that's going to factor against you as a consumer. So there are some checks and balances. The other group is where the credit provider has taken all those steps, but despite that, they still enter into the consumer and the consumer did not understand. So you can see in South Africa, this is an important thing. And giving our demographics, our history, this is very difficult for consumers to understand and credit providers to show. Or if entering into the credit agreement was that last thing pushing the consumer over the edge and made him or her open debt. So this is reckless lending. So you can see that credit bureau reports are crucial. There's very comprehensive affordability regulations in the National Credit Act. It's the regulations to the Act. And the big thing here is that the credit providers, banks, for other words, have to prove the discretionary income and gross income. So that means looking at your payslip or bank statements for the last 3 months. I'm not going to deal with the regulations. It's very intricate, but in essence, it really just says there's definitions. This is your gross income, this is your expenditure. For example, it even factors in maintenance payments that needs to be factored in. And in short, it's very complicated to understand, but they are rigorous. And the important thing of this is they give duties to the credit providers, but also to the consumer. So if you want to get credit, you need to at least declare your income and expenses and be honest. As I mentioned, the maintenance payments has been factored in. That was given the situation in South Africa with that, the single net homes, that is important to factor that in. The only interesting thing I'll mention here in the affordability regulations is that there's a table and where they say if you earn a certain amount, they assume this is your expenses. If it's less, you have to prove it. The only thing I'll mention here is that you work with 800. So if you have a consumer earning less than 800 per month, that person automatically cannot get credit unless they can prove they have less expenses, because this is deemed to be their living expense, at least that they keep that. So one could argue that maybe that marginalizes people, but it's open for debate. So why am I mentioning affordability regulations? It is to come to credit reporting. In terms of the regulations, it is compulsory for credit providers to obtain one. It sets out the periods you need to get these reports before they grant you the credit. So for general credit, that will be short-term credit, unsecured, say credit cards or short-term loan or payday loan, payday lending, is 7 business days. They need to check that 7 days before. If it's big credit like mortgages, secured credit, 14 business days. So now you can see there's a big delay from reporting your information or getting your copy and actually granting. A lot of things can happen in 14 days. Now the regulations stipulate that the adverse information, in other words, if you default, they will only report within 3 months. But the information will still register you that you haven't paid your account. So if you skip your payment, the algorithm they use will still be reported to them and it will give you a number, whatever model they use. If you do your credit score in that period where you're in default, it will give you a lower score. Although they are not at reporting, you have failed your payment per se. Because sometimes these reports will also show slow payer, will show you if you have a default or a judgment against your name or if you've been sequestrated as a consumer. And they keep that for certain periods set out in the Act. Now, what is vital for credit bureaus? Of course, the information that's being kept there, is it correct? Because that's how they use the algorithm to determine your score. As I mentioned, there's some delay in information. Then, as mentioned before, they keep positive and negative. They do not determine whether you can afford the credit. They just keep that information. They don't make the granting decision. But credit providers use this, and if you have a bad score, you're not going to get the credit. You'll have to go in and explain why you think you need the credit. Now, there's a lot of secrecy around these algorithms. As I mentioned, we don't know what they use in this to determine our score. You just get the score and it shows you good, slow, bad, payer, or high risk. And there's no guidance in any regulations or the Act, even for credit providers, how to deal with negative information. So say you have a thing like you're a slow payer. Does that mean I can't get credit? No one's saying it. There's a definition of what is reckless credit. So it will come down to risk appetite of the credit provider and how they deal with it. But there's no guidance on how you deal with negative information. And the big thing is we cannot challenge our credit scores. We can only challenge if we've been blacklisted in error, if there's error on the information. But we can't challenge the algorithm. There's no right or recourse for us to say we disagree with the credit score. Now, what does the credit report look like and what information is used? Now, the National Credit Act is quite prescriptive of the type of information that can be kept. The first is your credit history. So that's a logical one. So if you have credit, and again, you need credit to build a credit score. They will keep that. This is your secured credit. If it was a credit card, mobile account, anything you purchase retail, maybe a clothing account. It will also show a pattern of payment. And that's why I said it will use that numbering. Every month, the credit provider sends the information to the credit bureaus, the registered, there's quite a few registered with the National Credit Regulator. And you'll see if the reason for termination of the credit agreement will be there. If you're under the debt review, debt restructuring, it will be in the report. If there's a judgment against your name, it will be in the report. Your financial history, for example, your past and current and present income, it will have that information on it. And your assets. So you'll see on your report, if you own a home, it will be listed there. If you have a motor vehicle finance credit, it will be on the system. Then education, career, employment, professional, business history. You'll find that on the report as well. And then lastly, your identity, name, number, date of birth, marital status, and your past addresses and contact details. And then obviously subject to the POPIA Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act. It needs to be compliant with that. So if you look, this is the information that they are permitted to keep. I'm not seeing anything on gender, but it's not specifically excluded either. The Act is just saying this is the information that is consumer information. But if you look at an identity document and a number, you can deduct, you can make deductions, whether it's a male or female. Even spending, you can make a deduction whether you think it's either a male or a female, or someone showing the traits of male or female based on spending. So it's not a matter of gender specific. It's not specifically prohibited to use gender, like other countries, it's prohibited of entering. But certainly you can make some deductions. And we don't know what the algorithm does. The same with career. We're putting it in there, but it also then creates the possibility of possible discrimination. So, for example, if I'm a professor, Tony is a past life administrator, will that discriminate against me and her? Yes, I'm sure it will. But is it discriminating based on the difference in income, or is it just because of my career? You see, so because we don't know what's going in here, we don't know how we can challenge, improve, or protect. So the report shows your payment profile. As I mentioned, that's the history. It will show those little numerials. And also distinguish between secured and unsecured credit. How do they factor that in? Again, we don't know that. We do know generally secured credit is generally good credit, whereas short-term credit, unsecured credit, is usually for consumption, unfortunately in South Africa. And that is considered more high risk than a good credit, which is, for example, a motor vehicle or a car. Again, we don't know what's factoring into this algorithm. So we have to look at the tips the credit bureaus give on their websites on how to increase your record. So we'll give you your payment profile. As I said, the judgments will be kept there for a certain period until you either settle it or the time has lapsed. And it gives you this credit score band. This is what we normally see when we do the free version. It will give you a score, I think it's usually sometimes out of 900. It will give you a score of that. And they have their own algorithms. So every credit bureau, as I said, it's trade secret. They don't want to share it. It gives them the edge because banks and credit providers choose their favorite credit provider, credit bureau, who they think will give them a better accurate estimation of consumer behavior predictions. There is no uniformity. So if we look at this, I used a family member for this one, and this is what it gave me. So we know more or less the information that's kept, the information they permitted to take, but this is what they give. So this person had an excellent score, but look at the age. I didn't put in age, but I put ID number, date of birth. It gives me gender. So that means there's an assessment of gender. This is a female. I don't know what that means. It also looks at province. So we know address is open for discrimination. We're in South Africa. We still sit with the consequences of apartheid. So your location is going to be making a deduction using the algorithm, right? So there's going to be discrimination. And they say population. I don't know what that means. I'm 4% of what population, or the person that was. What does that mean? And then star signs. I don't know what that means. So shall we now brand star signs? Who's at risk? Jared will be questioned afterwards. Then you're welcome. I want us to discuss this. So I'm putting it out there, and then you can tell me at the end, what do you think? And we can create our algorithm. So this is what it gave me. Not much to go on and not much to challenge. But I'm sure this person, whatever stance I'm, will be happy with that. So, does gender matter or should it matter? As I mentioned, listing gender information is not prohibited in South Africa. Not excluded, but it's also not specific. There's just nothing. Other countries have specifically banned this. But as I mentioned, you can still make deductions. The algorithm can still access the information everywhere and make a deduction. I'm going to put this to you. So what if empirical research shows us, or statistical research shows us something about gender? If we take insurance, for example, we use the example of first for women. So generally, they are saying women are better drivers. Of course, we are. Because they have less accidents. I'll get to that. I see Tobias laughing. So their model is that women provide lower risk for motor accidents, and therefore qualify for a cheaper rate at that company. I'm sure they don't discriminate against men in the sense that they can get insurance. But now if we take that information, so as females, we'll take that discount, I'm sure we will. But can we also then maybe say that generally, remember algorithms work with general, that less females are driving vehicles. And when you go on the road for holidays, it's more often than not males driving that car. So is that not maybe a reason why these male accidents have more car accidents? So that's something to think about. I don't know what the answer is. Then accidents like sporting and adventure. Generally, remember, I'm not excluding all females, tend to do silly things. Yeah. Yes, silly things. So from an insurance perspective, men could probably be generally more prone to accidents. So it could be a high risk for insurance. Do we factor that in or do we not factor that in? Then debt repayment. We're talking about credit. General empirical research shows that females are better repayers than males. That's not what I'm saying. That's what you're laughing, you're agreeing. Why? Because females generally look after the family. So they try to keep them home with these payments, and they take the credit for schooling and so forth. So this is what research is saying. So should we completely exclude gender? If this is what some research is showing us. So I don't have the answer. I'm just posing a thing that we can think about this, whether we should factor this in, yes or no. And then the last one, what about living age? So this is medical, statistically, general research says, who lives longer? Females. So is that a risk maybe for insurance or even repayment? And if we look at age is obviously something that does factor in if you take credit. If you're a certain advanced age, you might not have enough time to repay, or you might not be working. So algorithms do possibly discriminate against gender depending on the information or the data set they are using this information from. And as I mentioned before, they work with averages. So it doesn't cater for the individuals. So you might be living in an area that's flagged for non-payment because it might be a province-strict area. Then you're not going to get the credit if we only work with the algorithm. So in South Africa, we don't only work with the algorithms, but it's going to be a huge part because we don't know what the credit providers do with the information. Now, the reality of South Africa is what? Low income and poor consumers. We have informal consumers, little street vendors. We have people that only do seasonal work, these jobs. And those people don't necessarily have bank accounts. So how do they access and how does this factor in when we get to algorithms? So we had a case a few years ago, 2018, and it was Truworths, which is a clothing company. And they challenged the affordability regulations that you need to prove the income, the gross and discretionary income. And they said these people either do not have bank statements or employment slips. And if they're informal street vendor, they don't have formal documents of a registered company. How does this factor in? And in short, the court agreed, and the court said, well, they're basically saying that that regulation is not applicable to this group of consumers. And we know the majority of South Africans are poor and low-income consumers, and there's a big portion of informal vendors. What the court then and what the regulator then basically did is said, yes, let's do away with that, where they don't only use those, where you could pay slips and income or maybe statements of the company. Let's use other verification information, other data sets, and that's a whole debate again. What databases do we use for that? Do we use social media? Do we use usage of data, mobile data? Do we look at your contacts in your phone? Or the payment of your utilities? I think that could be a measurement. If you're even on prepaid, it gives you some indication. So in a certain way, algorithms can assist people that do not have bank accounts and formal information that we can assess. So it is a tool that could be used, but the regulator wasn't sure how to do that, so they just pushed it back in a little guideline where they say the credit providers can decide what information to be used. Now, the World Bank has really basically said algorithms are important, assessing of credit is important, but it should not stifle innovation. And there's just a quote, because it can have unintended consequences if we are over-regulating and if we're too strict with it. So now we get to closing, and then we can have a discussion on this. Now, internationally, there's been stern warnings against the risk of these algorithms, this machine learning. And what they have proposed is human oversight. So they've introduced human oversight. They have also introduced the type of information that goes in. But as I mentioned, that's not necessarily a safe tool because you can still make deductions. They can also still access other databases which we don't know. Remember, we'll see what goes in, but we won't be able to challenge how that algorithm works, and we won't know because it's a trade secret. And we also do need to protect trade secrets for businesses. But we need to balance that against consumer protection. Now, the impact of these algorithms obviously can be substantial because it can affect your credit, your medical, your insurance. So it can be dire, especially if you look at South Africa, where we are trying to include people financially. Now, as I said, some countries have limited information, so we can't put in gender. And it always takes location, and we know location, geolocation, that's a recipe for discrimination. We've seen that in subprime lending in America as well, where certain areas will be high risk or viewed high risk. So the legislature should, I think, in my view, create a framework. But we need to think about this framework and are we limiting what goes in? Or do we want transparency? In my view, I think we want transparency. I think we need some human oversight. And consumers should be appropriately notified about how the automated decision-making works to some extent, while also protecting the trade secret of the company. And to protect us from harm, especially with these professional services, and humans should always be accountable. So I think somehow we need to be able to improve our credit bureau reports and have some insight in that. Now, algorithms work with databases. This is where big tech companies come in. That's Tobias's area, and we know they assess this. They use social media. That's why we should really be careful what we post on social media. And the continued secrecy and the trade secrets that need to be protected, but also it shouldn't discriminate against us. And in my view, it should really show exactly the information being used. We don't need to go to the websites of these credit bureaus to see tips. For example, there they will say, if people make inquiries on your profile, it gives you a bad rating. So if you're shopping around, they view it as you shopping around for credit, you're being sending. But what if you are shopping around to find the best deal? For example, there was an example in America where medical insurance is an issue and the person went to the coffee shop at the hospital every day. And there was obviously a tracker in the car, which we see with Discovery and things like that. So what did they do? They made a deduction that the person was sick because he went to the hospital every day. Meantime, back at the ranch, there was a nice coffee shop with nice muffin. Wrong error. That's the problem with big sets of data and social media. You're not going to do your social media with your worst, your tracksuit pants, unless it's a name brand. So it's going to show you a distorted reason of spending. It's going to flag you as a high-risk payer. And as I said, it works with the averages and not with typical behaviors of people and not cater for individuals. So there will always be bias in my view, and we need to mitigate that. Now, in South Africa, we don't have legislation yet. We do not require human oversight. And if we look at alternative data, for example, now to verify this low-income consumers, these informal, what do we need? How do we do that? More algorithms? Or what data can we use? As I mentioned, utilities is a good way. What about shopping a shopper loyalty card? That information is probably sold on as well to not only track spending, but also to track your spending. So if I like to buy a lot of wine, is that a negative? I might be a functioning alcoholic that repays my debt. But it will track me. I might have a big party. I'm buying for someone else, buying for a friend. So these are things, the data that will be used, and they will make deductions about you. So we really need to know that Big Brother is watching us, I think. And then the reliability, as I mentioned, how do we interpret this? And now, lastly, if we create an algorithm now today, what are we going to factor in? Do we factor in gender, location, our job description, income, asset? And then what about criminal record? If we create one today, I'm sure we're going to say, let's put in criminal record. But what criminal record? I suppose that would be something related to money. An assault, would that be relevant? Maybe it could, because the person could maybe struggle to find income. So it's really difficult if you really think about it. What do we put in an algorithm? Because what are we testing? And this remains the two questions. I don't have the answer. Does gender matter? I think the empirical research has shown that there are some differences, either between gender or traits of the gender, if you're spending like a female or a male, depending. And is it justifiable to factor this in? And now we're open for questions. I do not have the answers to these two.
I don't know how the black box works, but in my mind, just thinking, I know the National Credit Act is against it, but you would think that if algorithms are being used and the law of averages is being used, you would think that the more voluntary disclosures put in would be more to the individual's benefit. Because yes, if you, let's say, didn't pay back credit, let's say after 5 years, all the information goes away on you, I'm sure it's still in this black box algorithm to say, look, either male or woman defaulted, this person had this amount of money, this person lived, all that information stored. So why, maybe this is just a question rather than a statement, is do you think that it would be better to have more voluntary disclosures to then affect the algorithm, either in a positive or negative way? Because if it's voluntary, you can just decide to, let's say, for example, in Limpopo, in insurance, if you take car insurance, it's more expensive because the roads are wet, whether you've had an accident or not.
Sure.
Maybe you can disclose, look, I've never had an accident. Maybe that will lower your insurance policy. That would be a voluntary disclosure. Do you think there should be more room for more added voluntary disclosures to be able to, let's say, distinguish yourself? Or do you think that we should still focus on this algorithm that's ones and zeros that pushes out an average? Because that could then, obviously, all these biases that you're unable to see because you don't see it will still come out. And obviously, if you make it, it's that whole thing that if you make it too personalized, it could obviously negatively affect you, depends what you've experienced in life. But maybe it also has positive like outcomes and conclusions. So.
Indeed. So the legislation is not against black box generally. So the National Credit Act, in fact, forces credit providers to assess and use these credits. They say credit histories, but they leave it out. And the only way to do that is credit report review bureaus. And it's also evident because they regulate them and they keep them from, they regulate them from the information. So they're not against it. But I don't think they really factored in the big importance of credit algorithms and the impact and the importance. They know it's important, but no one's looked at that yet. So it would be easy to put this into the National Credit Act. And I think I agree with you that if you can know what's being assessed, we can give them the information they are looking so that you can improve it. But because we don't really know what goes into this black box, we can't improve it. Because we know this goes in, but we don't know where else they find the information. I don't know how that works to buy. You'll know with big tech, where they access this information, where do they get it? I mean, some of these things are so advanced. It might be your data usage on your phone, website you are visiting. We know our information, although protected, is not really protected at all. You'll get a phone in the country and you'll see spam within minutes from getting that SIM card. But I agree with you. We need to show what are you assessing that I can give you and guide you to show you that even if I live in this area, I will repay my debt. So I agree with that. But to do that, we'll need legislation and we'll need some more information of what are they assessing. What is the big factor in that slide I showed you that gave that person a good score? Was it the type of credit? So now we have to go through the websites and check. Was there too many queries on did I do too many queries on my account? Or is it my degrees, where I studied? Any other questions?
Is there legal recourse? If you know, I have experienced everything, the bias that you've just spoken about. I live in Mitchell's Plain. I'm administrator, I'm a female, I'm a person of color. Even so, annually, I would check for cheaper insurance. Checks out the same information because I live in Mitchell's Plain, Iris.
Yes.
However, I've never claimed from my insurance. You know, in that for theft or breaking the car, whatever it may be. So that's the one thing. And secondly, I saw the bias going through the divorce that I went through.
Yes.
Was I couldn't get credit because I was going through the divorce and I was managing community property. Don't judge me. However, my children's dad could get credit while he was going through that same divorce, and he got better credit interest rates than I did. So I know that is, so I'm asking, I think my question is, if we have all of this information, right? What legal recourse do you have as women? I remember sitting in one of those AI conferences where they were talking about how the AI is generated by men for their interest in mind, and we don't benefit from that at all. Also, language gets in there. So I don't speak a proper English. I don't speak a proper Afrikaans, but my language is not added in there as something on a checklist. So I'm asking again, what do we do? Because we have all of this information. So
that's exactly the point. Because we don't have that. So now you have to argue with your insurer or your bank to tell them, but what you are showing is not true. And you're right, with divorce is a funny thing because that is a negative for credit. But now you've shown, so you've divorced, your husband's divorced, but they don't factor that in correctly. Is it because the kids are aware? Or is it because there is discrimination against gender? But of course we don't know what factor, and that is what we need. So we need to at least protect ourselves and have recourse. And because we don't have human oversight of these algorithms, the banks will say, but this is your score. But we need that report to improve and eradicate. For example, as Jared has said, the information you've never claimed. Because you now as an individual will now fight individually. But if we have some recourse, it will be easier.
Yeah. Because even checking for a cheaper insurance, for example, or home loans, maybe I want to now go to another bank for a better interest rate. That goes on my credit scores. I'm looking for credit.
Correct.
And then it's negative. And they will tell me, check again in 3 months' time, but I'm still going to be phoning banks and asking them,
And
what
it's not a
credit can you
negative.
give me?
It's not a negative. I don't know why that is, but it is viewed that you are shopping around for credit, for short-term credit. But ideally, it isn't, and that's the bias. But we need to eradicate this, and obviously, credit bureaus will protect this.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for your interesting presentation. I'm glad I attended. It was accidental. It wasn't part of my plan today, but I had lunch with Caroline
And you had free food, that always.
yeah. So I'm just thinking that probably a way to go around this, and I'm sure the credit bureaus, because the organizations always run against self-regulation, or even when they do self-regulation, it's half-baked. Maybe the national credit regulator can, bring out a guideline that insists on explainable, what we call, now let's talk about explainable AI. If I use your term, I could say explainable algorithm.
Yes.
The student over the gentleman over there was talking about the black box. There's actually a very strong black box, that tend to keep what is happening behind the systems out of the face of ordinary persons like you and I. Okay, and I think the way to go around it is to insist on rules that compel, and I use the word advisedly, compel designers of the algorithms, developers of the algorithms to explain, okay, why should Mr. A or Mr. B with this data, with this particular information, get this credit score? In other words, those rules will insist on them, putting systems as part of the algorithms that makes it very easy, not simply put, very explainable to the persons using the algorithms, and that would help to probably take away these questions of bias, because once they are compelled or obligated to explain why certain things are the way they are, they will then be very careful how they design or develop the algorithms. Now, I know that OpenAI, for instance, because of these whole conversations around explainable AI, and of course, what is happening in Europe under the EU AI Act, OpenAI and some other AI developers are beginning to apply those rules to make sure. Recently, I saw that the OpenAI put together some experts, to more like, they call it red test or so, more like run the systems that they tend to put out before those experts get feedback, so as then to be able to take care of that black box question.
Okay.
Microsoft too is doing a similar thing, but I think that they are doing those because of the EU AI Act, for instance, and some national regulations that are coming out. While South Africa doesn't have an AI law, as we know,
Yes.
under the National Credit Act, the national regulator of that system could bring up guidelines that compel, or that,
Correct.
well, not guidelines, but say regulations that compel the credit bureaus to do so. You know that the data regulator, I can't remember the technical name now, the regulator in charge of
Information.
administration regulator is already thinking of
Yes.
rolling out regulations that will take care of the implication of AI systems on data protection.
Yes.
So just like that would probably help.
See, so in terms of you very valid comments, thank you. So the National Credit Act has the provision that if your credit is declined, that you can get a reason for it. So the reason will be general. They will probably say you can't afford it, your income, or they will give you the general answer, your credit score is too low. And that's where they fail, because we don't know how to improve that, and we don't know based on a credit report. What is the reason? So Tony, is it, for example, what is the reason that your score is different to your husband, for example? What is it? And if they can explain that, as you said, explainable AI, you can challenge that and you can argue that. Of course, we don't know. They'll just say credit report score is showing you as X number. So that is useful. And I agree with you. If we roll out an AI Act, it's going to take a long while, because they'll try and regulate all AI. If we focus on the National Credit Act as the Amendment Act or regulations, because we do have the affordability regulations that makes it compulsory to use that. It's an easier fix. We know regulations go slightly faster. We can fix it here, but then you need one for insurance again. So it's going to be piecemeal legislation.
Yes, it's possible to have, in fact, in our book, one of the things we found is that there are different models for regulating AI. You can go full blown, get it, and that, like you said, can take forever. But exist some laws that exist at the moment, like the National Credit Act and the laws regulating insurance, already have, room that can allow for piecemeal, piecemeal regulation.
You could even do guidelines from the
The only
regulator.
problem with that is the fact that because that space is very technical,
Yes.
you may end up having inconsistencies or irregularities in the piecemeal regulations. And that's
In general. Thank you, Desmond.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that with algorithms, we don't know exactly how they process the information and everything. So I just wanted to ask, like, isn't there a way maybe we can get to understand how these algorithms work, maybe in order to help us in curbing against the discrimination which comes out later on? And also, in addition to that, I just wanted to ask that not knowing how the algorithms work, is it something which is particular to South Africa, or it cuts across all jurisdictions?
So it cuts across all jurisdictions. Different countries use it for different things, but we are catching on. We've always used it for credit reports, but it's more prevalent, and we'll see this more often. What was your first question? We don't know how it works.
Like, yeah, since we are not sure how the algorithms work and
Yes.
how they come up to the
So what I deducted from looking at the website is if you look at the tips, it makes some deductions. So we can see what goes in. And when I looked at my report, you can see what's there. Some list your degrees, some list your job, some list your address. So then you know that's what they're assessing. But there's also little tips on all the webs, on all the credit bureaus. Remember, there's quite a few. TransUnion, CompuScan, and so forth. Experian. They give you little tips. And then from that, I make the deduction. This is what they're assessing. And there, for example, they say the distinguishing between secured credit and unsecured. But if you haven't achieved, or you don't have enough money to secure a house, that means you will never be able to build a good credit report if they are just going to factor in secured credit. And we know access to housing, it is expensive, and house prices are just going one way. So it is, yes.
Michelle, because you spoke already, we have two techies in the room that also need to leave. Maybe they have some of the answers, so we should quickly listen them.
No, as I was listening to the discussion, I think the question for me was what really happens in the black box, so right? And what kind of AI are we discussing? Because we tend to now equate AI with anything software related. So is it really an AI that is unpredictable in the way that we, even techies, if I understand correctly, even techies cannot tell us what the AI thinks, right? And how it arrives at a decision. Or is it machine learning or some other software that takes actuarial science, for example, kind of established traditional way of assessing statistical outcomes, right, that the credit bureaus are using? So here is my first question. Do we know what South African credit bureaus are actually using? Is it new AI? Or is it some kind of a software that does assessment that is assisted by, because we know what data goes in, but the answer is, or rather, we, even techies cannot tell you what the AI is actually thinking in producing the results if we are using that new AI. And the second is, I was just looking at Law Library, at the person at Poppy, and Poppy tells us that, as far as I can see, Poppy tells us that there cannot be an adverse decision taken against you purely solely based on automated decision making, right? So if it is like this AI that produces in a black box a result, there should be a human intervention at some point in the chain before you're adversely affected by a decision. So how does that, I mean, you mentioned Poppy several times. Is that being used currently? Is it being used widely, that provision?
Not really.
Okay.
Because, as you said, we don't know what goes in.
Yeah.
We don't know the technology being used. And I doubt that they will share that unless they are compelled to share it. And if you say the techies don't understand this, how can consumers understand that or protect ourselves? Because that means we're just putting in random information. And So the human oversight, I suppose, comes from the bank, the credit providers, looking at the report, looking at the profile of the consumer. Is it an existing consumer? Then it's easy.
Yeah.
So if the score's fairly low, they will say, but I know this client, she's banked with us, it's fine. Or they can look at the other requirements. If it's a business proposal, is there a chance of success?
Yeah.
But that's the challenge. So POPIA is one of those acts which are very complicated and doesn't really align well with this portion of the National Credit Act. So it needs to be aligned better.
Okay.
Other question?
So just to build on what Maria said there. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm a software engineer. That's my training. And my first thought is that it seems like it's very easy these days to demonize the algorithm. And I don't want to defend the algorithm. I don't know what the algorithm is. But I think it's really worth unpacking what exactly does an algorithm mean? So from a software standpoint, an algorithm very simply is a set of steps. If this, then that, if this, then that, or multiply these numbers together, and if the number is greater than 10, good score. Less than 10, bad score. Very straightforward from a conceptual level. So let's pretend we didn't have a machine doing this. So let's pretend I was a credit bureau, and I've got a warehouse of thousands of people sitting there following this algorithm going, if this, then that, if this, then that. And is that acceptable? Is that more acceptable? Is that more human than a computer doing it? Is one question we could ask. In some ways, the computer eliminates some biases because a human doing this can make mistakes. A computer is very good at doing exactly the same thing again and again and again. A computer isn't, a human isn't, right? So actually having humans in the loop can be a problem. Also, it means a human is looking at your information, right? Poppy says humans shouldn't be looking at this stuff. A computer looking at it is to a degree safer. So there's trade-offs here. In terms of can we explain what an algorithm does, we can, yes, in terms of we can say it followed the steps, right? A way a credit model algorithm works is it takes a huge number of inputs, and then it says it's trained on that data, and it says, you know, we take 10,000 lending records that we've had over 10 years, and we said, you know, all these attributes, male, lives in this area, repaid previously, has been through a divorce, 5 kids, whatever. They get as much information on this person as they can. It doesn't need a name. And they said, was this a good lending decision? Yes or no? And they take all of this data and they literally just crunch the numbers. And so if you asked for clarity on what is this, what is my report, how was it built up? It'll say, well, this little thing counted 0.25. This little thing counted 1.98. This little thing, like, it would be overwhelmingly meaningless. So it can be explained, but not in a human interpretable form. And again, I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just saying, I think it's a fundamental trade-off we make as society to say, if we're allowing a black box, because that black box effectively means we could have a computer, we could have a team of individuals sitting in a warehouse, a staff cohort doing it. It could be someone sucking their thumb. But if we allow a black box, it allows for competition in the space. And that is a good thing because it actually, to some extent, because my guess is it helps issue credit in a safe way, right? But it comes with this, how do we justify this decision that was made in a black box? And we can regulate it by saying, well, we'll justify it and manage it by saying, well, what goes in? Because we can control what goes in. The only other alternative is to say it's a white box. You can see into it, you can see exactly what is going on there. And either that thing you'll be looking at will be meaningless to the extent it may as well be a black box, or it will have the regulated to be as simplified as possible to make it understandable by humans. That will push inefficiencies into the market because it'll say we have very simple credit decision algorithms so that we can understand it. And it will mean individuals who probably should get good credit don't get good credit. And I think that's a fundamental trade-off we make in society of balancing these things up. My last thought is just, I've heard the word discriminate a lot. And I think in popular culture, I think maybe in law, there's a particular meaning of discriminate with a negative connotation. And I wonder what it should look like. And it's that last one there really is, what if we use the word differentiate? Because I think a credit score should differentiate on as many things as necessary to make the decision of, is this a safe lending thing to give? I don't know, like, two people living in the house, same income, going through a divorce. Maybe the one person has a very different spending pattern to the other person. So maybe it's a reasonable differentiation to make that. I think, yeah, it's very, very complicated. And I think, but those are fundamental trade-offs we have as a society, is to make that decision. Sorry, the last thing is just as Maria said, there's also quite a big difference between like a large language model as an AI, which has a degree of randomness built into it. So if I do the same thing to my large language model, to my ChatGPT, if I put the same inputs in, I'm not guaranteed the same outputs. Whereas a credit algorithm like this is built to be more robust. It's built to be, I put the same things in, I get the same things out. And those are two quite different types of algorithm. And I think it's really worth differentiating those, because you can regulate them quite differently. There's the risk profiles on using those two things are quite different. Thanks for listening.
I do agree, algorithms are important. I mean, it does save time, and more generally, it is correct for a large portion of consumers. It will predict quite accurately, but it's all the other cases it doesn't. So I think you need both. You probably need algorithms. It's important. And you do need some human oversight, but what that means is what we need to decide. And this is why I pose these questions, because I think you're right. Sometimes it would be relevant to differentiate, maybe not discriminate. It will be relevant, but that's what we need to decide. And the only way to test whether an algorithm is better than a person is if you have the same person taking the same credit, having the same circumstances. So how do you test that? So same person, same credit, one with the person and one with the algorithm. And we're not going to do that because we're not going to live twice. Well, not that. So it is important, but definitely algorithms are important and useful
Jerry's question last, and then we need to break first because the popcorn is going to get cold outside. I think that's important to many.
No, it's okay.
The techies put you off, right?
Sorry.
It's just explain why we need to know what they're doing if they don't even know what they're doing.
Michelle, thank you very much. I think also for actually ending with questions, I think this is super useful because some of us are still in the potentially pursuing like kind of a master's degree or something afterward. There's excellent legal research questions for your thesis in there. So please do consider them. Thanks for making time to come here during the lunchtime, and Michelle in particular, thanks for sharing your wisdom. Thanks.
Well, I posed many questions, but at least we're thinking about it and not just a knee-jerk reaction with you need to pull these or be scared that Big Brother is watching you.
Lunch is served.
Thank you.
Michelle, let's eat first. Or get her please. Thanks for coming.
Have we ended the recording?
No, not yet.
No, you must. You're a lawyer, man. Differentiate. Differentiation.